All right, all right, all right. What's going on, everyone? Good evening, good evening. Listen, guys, I am beyond excited to be here with you this evening. And not only me, but having one of the most sought after dynamic speakers I have ever seen. Linnita hosting with us, and we are in for a big treat, guys. So, if you don't know who I am, this is your host, Eco Arc Shaw, and I'm beyond excited to have you with us this evening for our second Hidden Secrets Live. Last week we had one about becoming a master of networking with Calvin, and it was absolutely phenomenal. But Hidden Secrets was created to help entrepreneurs learn from marketplace leaders that have harnessed and maximized their God-giving superpower into this world. And when I tell you Lenita is one of those people, I can't speak highly enough of her. So I got to read her bio before I let her get a little speaking on this beautiful platform. But she lived the truth that communication can shift careers. It could boost confidence, transform cultures, and touch every aspect of our lives. But she wasn't born the woman who could command a room. She had to become her. She had to build the skill set to create success, so she did. She tapped into the power of her voice, learning to articulate her skills and in a way that opened doors and significantly amplified her income. Because as entrepreneurs, we all about our income. We're about that purpose, but we're about our income at the same time, right? But more importantly, it magnified her impact. It wasn't sufficient just to speak. She had to ensure she was heard. And I, that alone speaks volumes of the woman of who she is, but I'm more excited about who she's becoming in this process. So I'm gonna give you a little round of applause for being on here, and I want you to, tell us about yourself.
Well, first, thank you, Justin, for having me.
My bad, they were excited to hear from you.
I love it. Thank you for the applause. And shout out to you for starting this awesome podcast and platform. I had a chance to listen to last week's episode and definitely insightful. But a little bit about me, I am a person that likes to be in the back of the room. I don't like a lot of attention. I'm okay being in the background. And um, I found comfort there. It was someone who saw something in me that kind of pushed me to the forefront. And as someone who was passionate about the skill of communication and the art of it, I studied it in undergrad and in grad school. And I'm still amazed that God positioned me in this place. This is definitely not what I had in mind. um, so I don't even know where to begin when people say, "Tell me about yourself." Like, what part do I start from? Like, help me a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what sparked the idea that communication was the art of communication was your calling? Like, what was that moment?
Yeah, I think growing up in the household that I grew up in with my parents who were very direct, um, in some ways, it was difficult to receive instruction from them. And as a child who was, quote, very sensitive, could cry at anything, just at the tonality that was a little high or aggressive, I'm crying. I developed a sensitivity to hearing a person's heart just based off of how they visibly looked and their tone. So I'd say that's one piece, and then also not only an awareness about how I am also communicating to other people, but the importance of that. I'd say in addition to my childhood, some of the places that I've worked in some awesome dynamic places where I saw healthy communication. It was admirable. And on the flip side of that, I've worked in some places where they were toxic and it was discouraging. Um, and so being in both of those environments for sure definitely played a pivotal role. 2 years ago, my grandmother was officially kind of like diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and her mobility started to decrease. So she has a home doctor or home care staff that comes and cares for her. And I was visiting her. She lives in New York, and she asked me to sit in with her for this home visit because I usually give them their privacy because they dressed her and that sort of thing. And she said, "No, I want you to stay. I want you to stay because sometimes I don't feel like they're always as like handling me with care." And my grandmother has an accent; she's West Indian. So when the doctor came in, I said, "Hi." I extended my hand like this. I said, "Hi, I'm Linnita. I am the oldest granddaughter." And I said, "It's nice to meet you." And this part of my hand met his hand, and I shook his hand firmly. And I looked him in his eye, and he did like this. He bent back a little bit, and he was like, "Wow, you must be someone very important." And I said, "Well, no, the only important part is that I love my grandma." And he said, "Well, I'm gonna make sure she's well taken care of." And when he left, my grandmother said that she never encountered that interaction with him. He was delicate, he took his time, and she said she associated with that his reaction to how I greeted him. And it just goes to show you that people perceive you based on your communication style. They perceive you as competent, they perceive you as credible, and in some degree, and I don't like that this is the case, but how serious they're going to take the interaction with you or how much they have to show up in order to meet your needs. And I didn't like that. I did not like that at all. My grandmother has broken English because she's West Indian, so there's a perception that people have when you have an accent or you don't speak the common dialect that you're maybe less capable or less competent. And those kinds of things are the reasons why we teach these things like communication skills.
Yeah, I mean, you said so much in such a little time, and there's so many different things that we could pick apart right here. One, I appreciate you for sharing that story about your grandmother, but one part that particularly interested me was the fact that you pointed out the handshake. And I think that most people, when they think about communication, they just think about the words that we say, right? And just
Yeah.
that alone, only just the verbiage. Can you elaborate more on how expansive actually communication is? It's not just your words.
Oh my goodness. So back in the 1960s, a psychologist did a survey and it measured the impact that a person had when communicating with a recipient. Based on their research at the time, it was presumed that 93% of what you communicate, the emphasis of it is nonverbal. Only 7% of it is verbal, meaning a person is they're hearing you, but 90%, 93% of what they're hearing is based on your physical appearance. So those are your facial expressions, your hand gestures, what your body is doing, or your feet shifting. But that research was recently revisited, and now it has a three-part breakdown with still in the lead your nonverbal communication at 55%. So again, nonverbal is also your tone. So right now I'm speaking in a very calming tone, like that's intentional. Your pitch, which is the volume, and if you start to get louder, you can be calming and louder, or you can be excited. Like those things add to your nonverbal communication. But when you are talking about touch, touch is a form of nonverbal communication too. So if you shake someone's hand and your fingers are loose, that's communicating something to the person. It could be lack of confidence, it could be lack of attention to detail. But if your handshake typically is firm, you're meeting like the crease of that person that is screaming confidence. And some people may say if it's coming from a woman, it's screaming aggressiveness too. But that also depends on what comes after that handshake. Is it a smile? Pleasure to meet you. Really excited that you're here. So there, the complexities of how we communicate is the smallest piece is what we're saying. But those other pieces, like our body language and our tone and our eye contact, add the complexities. But they're just as important as what we say.
Yeah, and then even to take it, not to get too layered, but just even the example of like when a woman shakes a man's hand and it may be like strong and it may come off a different way. Yeah, we're accounting not only for how we perceive things, but we're also accounting for how others perceive it. And then
Yep.
I think it's important to even think about what you said earlier. And I truly believe that the best orators in the world are the people that actually don't like to talk. They like to listen. They like to read. They like to analyze. And that's why you prefer to be in the back of the room. And that's what gives you the ability to communicate the way that you do because you listen and you're more insightful on what's
Mm,
going on outwardly than, of course, what you are perceiving it as. And so
so
how
good.
if we if we bring this to how in the
Whoa.
We got a special guest.
yeah, we got a special guest and it's my wife.
Hey, wifey.
But so as far as when we're looking at communication from how we view things, how as a orator, a speaker, even as an entrepreneur, how do you tailor your message to speak to the heart of your audience, right? Because the way that we perceive things versus how they perceive things will be two different things. So I know you do certain things around coaching executives and people of that nature in this realm. So can you give us like a little glimpse behind the curtains on how that works?
Yeah, you hit the head on the nail. The nail, however that saying goes, but the commonality, no matter who I'm speaking with, if it's executives, church leaders, college students, the commonality is the state of our emotions affect how we communicate. So this is deep for me. This isn't just showing up teaching nonverbal communication, body language, because you could get that off YouTube. But we go all the way back. And no matter if it's consulting, keynoting, or coaching, we talk about like, what did you observe? What types of communication did you observe in your childhood? What types of communication did you observe in your first areas of employment? What did professional communication look like in your first workplace or as an entrepreneur? What did that look like? Then we do an assessment of their communication style. So we say, okay, well, I'm gonna have you go out and ask some other people in their opinion, how would they describe how you communicate? And from there, we develop a basis. So I think that we all should have a goal when we're communicating. So I'll tell you, Justin, my goal is I always want people to feel safe and I want them to feel heard. Now, that sounds easy, but that has a lot to do with how I create space for them to talk and make them feel safe, acknowledge what they hear, empathize. Those are compounding things. And then when that atmosphere is established, I am free to kind of share, coach, train because they're receptive. And so, getting people to identify what is the goal of your communication? Is it to be assertive, firm? Do you desire authority? Or do you desire to build community? You want people to feel safe, seen, heard. Because based on that, we're going to backtrack and start looking at okay, now let's start assessing your nonverbal communication. What are some of the go to words? What are some of the go to phrases that you use? How do you use your body to emphasize what you're saying? So, that's one realm of it. Then the other thing is getting people to have an awareness about how emotions show up in their body. I am so shocked at the number of adults who cannot describe to you what emotions look like in their body. The basic emotions
Mm.
of happiness, anger, frustration, and like disappointment. There is a physiological response that the body has. Emotions are the highest bioregulator, meaning physically your body will be doing something when you're experiencing an emotion. And getting people to make the connection to based on that feeling, that likely drives how you communicate until you learn to manage your emotions. So yeah, we could go through all of this and talk about how, yeah, you should do this in your body language and la la la. But if you cannot self-regulate, all of that goes out of the window as soon as you are emotionally triggered, or maybe you're not at a place where you're emotionally neutral. So the other piece of that is helping people to identify the state of their emotions and regulate it. So you see how it can be a little complex. It's not just communication. It's a holistic view of how a person shows up because that really dictates how they communicate.
Wow. I gotta let that sit for a second because I'm a stickler for always looking at everything from a bird's eye view, meaning like how you said, looking at things in a perspective of how it affects the whole, right? Because we like to operate things in different silos. And just like how you were
Yeah.
saying, number one, communication isn't just what you say, it's also your body language, it's also how you regulate your emotions, it's also how you articulate that message. It's the goal of what you're trying to get across to the individual that you're speaking to, and there's so many different complexities to it. It's just amazing to think that something that we use so loosely has so much power,
Mhm.
yet we don't have control over it. And so,
Wow.
how
Wow.
can people be more intentional about what they say?
We have to learn ourselves. Being there's so much power in developing a very keen intentional self-awareness. So, if I could make this so simple because I love simple language. When something bothers you, really sitting and reflecting, what is that? That kind of struck a nerve. Why? What is it about what they said bothers me? Before we respond, before we react, because when we can get the answer to that, we can identify the emotion. Is it embarrassment? Is it feeling like less than, lack of? Is it feeling guilty? Once we can identify the emotion, then we can address it. The body so how God designed us. I'm so fascinated by this every time, but those emotions that you experience when you're triggered is likely triggering a moment that existed prior before. So let's say you're in the office, or let's say you're an entrepreneur, you have a virtual team, and you all are having a team meeting, and someone on the team brings up that, they feel like you're jumping the gun and creating extra work for them. And that strikes you. The question I would have for you is how do you know what was it? How do you know it struck you? Well, when they said it, did your heart start beating faster?
Mm,
Did your skin start to heat up? Did you start to get hot? Did you notice you start shifting in your seat? This is very keen awareness. Most people will not
Linnita,
identify that this is happening.
I, I lost you.
You lost me? Can you hear me
Is that
now?
me?
No? Still? Is
I
it
don't
you?
think
Let's see.
that's me.
I I can you hear me now?
Okay, I think you're back. You're back. Say something.
Okay.
Yep,
Testing,
that might have been
testing.
me. But I'm sorry.
Things
So
happen.
heart beating faster when somebody you know comes at them in the workplace.
Yep. Or they feel like they're getting hot, or they have an immediate need to kind of defend or justify or kind of jump in to kind of state their case or prove something. When we develop an awareness about that, we can then ask ourselves when it's happening, okay, what is it that's bothering me about this? And a very mature communicator will say that kind of struck a nerve a little bit because I don't know if I if I'm always ready to accept that I do jump the gun. So I want to park this and process it for a second. Let's come back to it. The better we get at doing that, the easier it is to communicate through those times where our emotions do kind of like take the steering wheel. So I'd say when you ask how can a person improve their communication, I'd say developing an awareness about how something makes you feel when you hear it.
Mm.
So processing, oh, that made me feel, or and sometimes you won't be able to answer those questions about how it made you feel in the moment. You will need time to reflect that. But I would say not ignoring those signs. I always say pay attention to what your body is saying. You will know.
That's powerful because I'm actually somewhat of a victim of that. So I remember anytime that any type of conflict has ever happened, I would feel it and then I would hide it. I would toss it in the back and then just keep pressing forward and just keep it in my backpack. But over time, not identifying it and bringing it to the forefront, it became an issue for me because I wasn't able to articulate myself moving forward in a lot of different conversations and navigate and have a resolve for certain things. And with this kind of in mind, I feel like here's this is about entrepreneurship, but I also want to it all ties together, right? I think about how conflict resolution happens. And when we think about conflict resolution, how we internalize those things like how you were saying and how we're able to articulate those things once we process it. A lot of us have a hard time. It's two things: either we respond too quick or we toss it to the back and have a problem with resolving it, because we run away from that thought of being able to figure out how to communicate it. So when we go through, and this is actually me just thinking
Hmm.
out loud a little bit, but just hearing you articulate how the 1-2 step to that is receiving the information, which is the way somebody communicates, being aware about how your body feels emotionally from that, because it is almost like a chemical imbalance that we feel in our body when that happens.
Yep.
And then being able to
Yep.
sit with it and then identify how to articulate that and communicate that, but make sure we're articulating in a way where it doesn't put a defense mechanism in front of somebody so it
Hmm.
can be resolved. So this is amazing. Again, communication goes so deep, but yet we treat it so simple. And so
Hmm.
let's talk about your journey in one exercising your voice. Actually, yeah, let's talk about that. When was the first time you actually exercised your voice on communicating in this topic specifically? When did you have the courage? What did it take? And then what was the experience once you actually were able to do that?
I'd say the first time was the first university that I worked at. I taught public speaking skills on a college campus, and that was in 2016 for the first time. Um, and I had non traditional students, I had military veterans, people who were going back to school who were married with adult children. So the dynamics of that institution were quite different than a traditionally aged college student. But that was like the first time I kind of realized, like, oh, I love talking about these things. I love teaching them. The second time, in which it was a parent conference for Jack and Jill in New Jersey, this is probably my most memorable speaking engagement. The parents in Jack and Jill, if you're familiar with Jack and Jill, it's a exclusive membership community for prominent Black dads and moms. You have to be, it's like a sorority. You have to be invited in. There's a minimum income requirement, and they invited me to their conference, and I've been in many rooms, but I ain't never been in a room to see so many people. So I'd never seen it. They were so uptight, everybody with their legs crossed, and in my session, it's maybe about 100 women. It was on how to have hard conversations softly. This was the first time where I was teaching forms of communication to an audience outside of a classroom. And Justin, there was not a dry eye in that room.
Mm,
And this goes to my goal of communicating. I said this, and I didn't always realize this was my goal, but to make a person feel seen and heard, to make them feel safe and heard. And the parents were having breakthrough moments about how their parenting style um, is directly correlated to how they were parented
mm,
and where their communication style comes from. And things that they wanted to change, it just started we didn't have enough time. I didn't even This was the first and only time I never got through all my content for something. I think we were stuck on the first. I was maybe about 1/3 through. um I was amazed to see, we're talking about CEOs essentially, women who take their emotions out of things, who on the outside maybe appear like their families don't have a need, to see their walls come down and admit to opportunities for growth and publicly share some of their parental struggles. Beautiful. Holy Spirit really saturated that room. The only thing we didn't do was pray. um so that was the first time I talked about it in, like, as a speaking engagement. That was in 2021.
wow, just 3 years ago, and you have
Hmm.
grown even further. You know, this isn't a question. I want to acknowledge your gift because the fact that you're able to do that for people in such high places that put themselves on
Hmm.
a platform that seem like they have it all together, like that's a true gift because
Mm,
those same people are the individuals that have to go to work and make the toughest decisions in the world and then have to come home and make the toughest decisions for their families. And for
very
them to
true.
be able to open up to somebody they probably met 15 minutes before you even opened your mouth
True. True.
and have the courage to speak about vulnerable experiences that they had and admit that there was a hole missing,
True.
that you don't they don't come across people like you that often, Lanita. They don't. They
And
don't.
that's a God thing.
Yeah.
That is a God thing. I can't take credit for that. Um, and how I know it's a God thing is because I don't always remember the things people tell me in privacy. I don't remember them, and people, they easily pour open their hearts, and I cannot recount it. But I do value creating that safe space, and I just praise God that people feel the sense of like safety when they encounter me. That's definitely a God thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. So there are a lot of different ways that we could take this. And because I mean, I'm loving this full blown conversation. Now, I'm a systems guy. I love processes. I love the analytics to everything. What did it look like when you first started your business? Like, what was your method? What was your strategy? Because I think one of my friends that's on the live actually right now, she gave me like a compliment, but it was like a stab in the heart at the same time. And I'll never forget it. She knew I had an amazing product. People loved my suits and all these amazing
Mhm.
things. But she was like, "Aren't you tired of being the best kept secret?" And
Mhm.
when she said that, it made me realize that I'm hiding my gifts from the world, but it's not as simple as just, putting it out there. There's a method, there's a strategy.
For
What did
sure.
that look like for you when you identified your gift, but now I have to put it into the marketplace to create the impact?
So I had to do that twice, because I made a significant pivot. So my audience changed, my price point changed, and my services changed. So the first time, I didn't even know what a system was. For years, I was just, I don't know what I was doing. It probably wasn't a business, to be honest. I just happened to be getting some money. Um, but when I did finally have, oh, this is good. What what kind of pushed me to develop a system was an IRS audit. I got audited by the IRS because I did not have, I didn't even know I was supposed to have this, but I wasn't paying any taxes on the money that I was getting. I didn't even know I wasn't. I didn't have no filing systems to justify what I had filed in taxes. So even though I submitted all this paperwork, which took hours, they didn't accept any of it. And I still had to pay. I had like an $8,000 tax debt. And that was in my early 20s. That is what drove me, okay, I need a system. So my first system was record keeping and bookkeeping, understanding how taxes work. And that was when I wasn't making any money. And
Wow.
at the time, my bookkeeper was like, I know you feel like you don't need this, but you're going to be grateful that you have the systems and kind of like the behaviors in place, because when you start making money, you do not want to backtrack and develop the system. So she kind of taught me like what's actually tax deductible. My hair and nails, unless I was getting it done on site, was not tax deductible, and I was not getting that done. So those kinds of things. My clothes, unless it was, so it was a lot of things that I was writing off that were illegitimate, essentially. So that was the first system that I had. The second one was a CRM, and I would say that was a game changer, a customer relationship management system, essentially. I had Active Campaign as my first one, and learning automations for emails, triggers, the importance of capturing data everywhere you go. Even if people were coming to something free, even if they were coming to something paid, even if I did not directly encounter them, like I'm speaking at a conference and I want to get their data to take it with me, like when I develop a system for that, game changer. And I would attach email marketing to that as well. So those are like the first two systems that I kind of created on the first half of my business, which was mainly leadership development for high school and college students. So we were consulting, speaking, training in that area. And then at the top of this year, I fully pivoted to work primarily with rising executives and organizational leaders in the realm of communication under my boutique firm called Vocal Value. And now my audience is, I mean, it's different. The price point is different. Their needs are different. Their language is different, but those systems are not different. So I'm still with that same bookkeeper, same accounting technique, same tax, like all of those things. CRM, email marketing, very similar. Just the language that I'm using, outbound marketing has changed. It makes you think more strategically about the investments that you're going to make and why when you start thinking of the systems that you have in place. So right now, for the very first time, I just hired a Google Ads person to help me do outbound marketing, something I've never done all these years. And I didn't know that that was a thing I should be doing. Um, and how that can tie into Facebook ads and YouTube ads, but starting the foundation from Google. The last thing I'll say, Justin, is I know there is a DIY society, and I am not opposed to that. But I will say, even when I invested in a person to do a service, I always learned what they were doing because I need to understand the why. Um, because there were points in my business where I couldn't afford to pay those people anymore, but I knew what they were doing and I could do it. So I gained a lot of knowledge. Like I had a shorter learning curve because I was hiring people to do the work, but I asked questions. Sometimes I even asked, can you create a Loom video walking through the steps that you do? I didn't know that I would reach a point in business where I couldn't afford them anymore and I might have to do it for myself, but I had a resource library for those people. So those are some of the things that I definitely learned along the way.
Wow. So hold on, because we went from, so you started off in one section, in one target audience, pivoted to the next. We're going to talk about that. We also talked about CRMs and how that helped you boost your business. We talked about good bookkeeping. So the
Yeah.
big OG Uncle Sam, don't come after us. And then of course we have the email services and all these different things. We're gonna cover the basic stuff later, because I think, in terms of like the softwares, the systems, I love those because you can just replicate that in any business. Once you learn them, you can just
Yep.
replicate it. But the one thing I
Yes.
think people don't know how to do, or more importantly, why to, is the pivot.
Oh my
And what did
God.
that look like for you? Because that's like taking a second leap into entrepreneurship all over again, especially when
That's
you
exactly
technically
what it
have
was.
more to lose than the gain. It's different from, having a full-time job and then starting like a side hustle business. But you had a full-time business that was thriving, and then you decided,
True.
I'm actually going to come over here. W- Why? What did that look like? And how can somebody else make a
Mm,
pivot that they're going to feel confident in their business, whether it's they're doing a whole new thing or if they're just changing their audience like you did?
yeah. Why I pivoted? I was bored. As I'm getting older, the audiences that I were working with, high school and college students, I still love them, but I don't feel as connected to the things that they're encountering and experiencing now. At my age, I was exerting more energy trying to put myself in their shoes than I would like to. And I was bored. The other thing is, after almost 11 years in this work, I wanted to be paid more money. So I was outgrowing the average price point for that particular audience. And someone will
Mm,
say, well, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I understand that. And two things can be true. But I just didn't want to do that anymore. So that was my why. It was hard. I questioned a lot of times, man, was that the right decision? Uh, this is how I know it was time. I was in Jack and Jill was probably one of my best clients, and for like 2.5 years in a row. And they don't work with just anybody. Very selective. I was in front of them. They pay on time. They pay on time.
we love a quick paid invoice every day of the week.
Listen, they don't. They trust you. I mean, great to work with. And I was standing in front of them having super impactful conversations. They were loving, and I was bored.
Mm,
Like, can you imagine right now you're talking to me on this podcast and you're bored, but you're just running through the motions? It felt empty almost. And so I took kind of like I did a fast because it started off as boredom and then it kind of transitioned into like a state of unhappiness, like an emptiness.
mm,
Like I don't want to. In fact, this is so crazy. I never realized this until now. The first moment that I told you about was in the summertime when I was in front of the Jack and Jill audience. They brought me back for a regional conference in October, which is the one I told you about, which was the first time I spoke about communication skills. I didn't want to get out of my bed to go and speak. I recorded a video about this because I was like, I never feel like this. I love people. I love networking. I love food. The food was good. Like they had all the bells and whistles at this conference. I did not want to leave my room. I dragged myself through on some clothes. That's how I knew. Because the Bible says, whatever you fix your hand to do, do it with all your might. I have adapted that principle. When someone trusts me to serve them in a capacity, I come prepared. I have prayed. I'm ready. I could not get myself to be ready for that. The crazy thing is, it turned out to be one of my most favorite, most probably impactful events. Praise God for that, because that was prayer. It was like I was going through war in my mind. So that was it was I say all that to say the pivot was hard. I also did a hard pivot and I don't recommend this. So I basically told all my clients I'm not doing that no more. I shouldn't have done that because that made all of my cash flow was zero 5 months in a row.
mm,
So what I should have done was just continue to do the work and grow the new pipeline. In all transparency, that's actually really hard to do. So, well, at least with the current team of people that I had. Um, so I cut it all off and literally built from ground zero. The reason why I wouldn't recommend that is two, in my new marketplace, nobody knows who I am. So it's literally starting over. I started over from media, like social proof in a sense. Um, it's different when you're in an industry, people in that industry start spreading your name, they know you. There's a social proof associated with you. When you switch industries, which is what I did, your new industry people, they don't know you. They and or they know you as that. So it's like, how can you be that and this? So having to go back and like create a sense of social proof for your new industry, that looks like content, that looks like media, that looks like web copy, that looks like photography. And for me, my demographic was changing in price point. I felt, I'm not saying this was necessary, but I felt like I had to look like that too. I
Mm.
had to look like I want to be paid a minimum of 10K. So that meant new photos. That meant learning. I even hired an image consultant. I learned like colors that complement me with the types of clothing because I'll be in different spaces now. And I have been. So there was a lot of change. And I remember the stylist, this is only God. She said, you're arriving before your time. I just want you to know that. Um, but go well, know that God is with you. Now, I never told this sister, and believers can sense a believer from another believer, but um, she was so affirming. She encouraged me to journal every step of my pivot. She said, you're going to wake up some days and you're going to be like, why? She never lied. So it was hard. It has been hard. That pivot has been hard mentally and financially.
You're arriving before your time. What does that mean to you?
I well, the irony is I've always saw that I could never articulate it in those words, but I've always been the youngest in the room. Everywhere. Workspaces, conferences. I've always been the youngest. And I looked young too. So people treated me as such until they heard me in whatever capacity I was in. It's almost like and I don't like this, but I people draw, and this is communication too. People draw assumptions about my competency just based on how I look, which is why that image consulting piece was important. Now, if I had a mature face and maybe some gray hairs, and sometimes weight also can translate maturity. So
Wow.
when you're slim and height too, I learned all these things through image consulting. So when you're shorter, like there's a perceived, this is crazy, right? Those visual elements, people draw conclusions about you. So just learning how people think and being prepared to kind of show up your best. But I encourage anybody who is thinking about a pivot, considering it, I would well, I fasted twice. I will say this. I fasted twice. The first time I didn't hear God say pivot. Um, but I had a sense of peace. While it was hard, I had a sense of peace that it was time. And so that's the first thing that I would do. Whatever your practice is and hear from how you hear from God or study his word, I would encourage you to do that. And the second piece I would say is put on your helmet of salvation, because the mental war that you will feel about your capacity, about your competency to make a change, especially if it's changing industry or price points, you will be challenged. Even a confident person, I consider myself a confident person. I was challenged. Um, but I would say keep pushing and get the faster you can get in your new community, like like a mastermind with the new audience and the new service, that'll also accelerate your learning curve.
This is amazing. I mean, Lanita, you have given them the blueprint to everything. I'm talking about to how to communicate, how to articulate yourself, how your body language comes together, how to arrive before your time, the systems that you put in place, how to pivot. I mean, so many different small components that end up, it's beautiful how a lot of times we think that it's the big decisions that make
Mhm.
the trajectory of our life change, but it's those small little incremental decisions that end up changing everything. And so my last question before we, conclude everything is the reason this is called hidden secrets is because when we first start in our entrepreneur journey, we go in it with a blindfold, a prayer, just saying, I hope this works. And we end up discovering a lot of different things through that journey. What was the hidden secret
Mm.
in your journey that you feel led to share with somebody that you learned that if they did this, or even if it just worked for you, just share what that was and how it has the potential to change everything for you.
Man, Justin, I wish in the very beginning, um, I didn't adapt my business to what people were buying. I wish I would have adapted my business to how God designed me.
Mm,
Because when people stop buying that thing, you're out of business. When you create the business on the infrastructure of how God designed you, like as you can clearly see, God designed me to communicate. And how I know it was God because I wasn't always skilled in this area and I wasn't confident as well. I mean, there's a lot of signs, but in the very beginning, I spent a lot of money molding myself to fit into like a buyable market, only to arrive at that market and feel out of place
mm,
for years. Like when I was traveling the country to speak on college campuses, majority white students, several times I was afraid to even be in that community. Like there weren't a lot of black people and they weren't excited to see me. I was literally there to do my job and collect money. Some of them never even said thank you. It was
mm,
I was in a market that I felt like God didn't design me to go into touch and reach, but I was making money. So I would say definitely design the business. Like if you can really identify how did God design you? Like I remember Tiara Lathan asked me this. This is when I first met her. She asked me, "What do you feel like?" She said something to the effect of like, "How do you feel like God designed you?" Or how what did she say? How do you feel like God designed, or what purpose do you feel like you've been called to solve, or something like that? And I said this at the time, and I wasn't doing that. And I said, "Oh, I know I've been designed to bridge communication channels between parents and their children." I wasn't doing that at that time, but I know I was designed to do that. Um, and I get a chance to do that today. It's just labeled differently. When I come into a workplace or organization, we're dealing with an adults. But what I'm always teaching is everything we model, we teach. So, how you're speaking, interacting with your children and spouses, there's a domino effect. So, while the out facing marketing does not say that, I definitely, by teaching what we're teaching, we're definitely doing that. So, that's definitely my hidden secret that took me almost 10 years to arrive at.
that is phenomenal. Oh my gosh. You look, I'm trying to be as professional as possible, but I had like a little praise break. I was trying to find a tissue and just be like, just I mean, that was amazing. It's almost like we're considering obedience at that point, right? Because we're
Mhm.
jumping into the marketplace and we're like, all right, cool. And we're listening. It's a fine line between listening to your consumer and being obedient to what God called you to do.
A very fine line.
Man,
Very.
I'm gonna just let that simmer on everybody's head. So, Lanita, I appreciate you so much for hopping on here on Hidden Secrets. This has like been absolutely phenomenal. I could probably actually talk for another hour, but it's getting late. I know we need to rest those vocal cords for whatever big, speaking engagements you got tomorrow because, I do want to share that. I remember, um, I know that you are aware about John Maxwell, and I almost kind of see the same level of impact. And when I think about it, my own personal mission statement is to basically build leaders, right? And the power in building leaders is that
Mm.
when you're teaching executives on how to communicate, it could be 10 people in the room, but they affect millions of people. and it's just a
Yeah.
game of multiplication. And the fact that you've been prepared in the space where you were teaching the children and now teaching the world changers, right? That's almost just like how Jesus came and got Peter from the boat and said, "Now it's time to be fisher of men." And it's just amazing to see
Mm.
how this glow up is happening. And I appreciate you for sharing your wisdom and insight. Um, I forgot last week, but how can people find you? Do you have any events coming up that can help people articulate and communicate to the best version of themselves? Go ahead and give us that 30-second pitch for us.
Yes, we do have an event coming up. It's called Stage Power Intensive. It's a public speaking class for rising organizational leaders and executives. If you're looking to increase your your visual and verbal presentation skills, you'll have a chance to practice it live. We have a full day, lunch and breakfast catered is included. I'd love to have you either virtually or in person. You have the option for both. If you go to stagepowerintensive.com, stagepowerintensive.com to find out more information about it. You can also use code GUEST in capital letters to get $200 off of your uh, registration ticket. That's the code GUEST and stagepower.com. That's our upcoming public speaking class, Saturday, April 27th. And you can find me online on every platform at Linnita Hosting. And if you want to learn more about what we're doing at Vocal Value, you can go to vocalvalue.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lanita. Enjoy the rest of your night. You guys, this is going to be back up for you to be able to play over and over and over again. I'm telling you right now, you're going to want to listen to this at least 15 times because she dropped so many gems. I have to sit here and listen to this immediately after we get off because I almost didn't take everything in. So I know I missed something. But anyway, you guys enjoy the rest of your night. And we'll see you next Tuesday on Hidden Secrets Live.